Sophie hadn't anticipated how strange the house would become once her parents pulled out of the driveway. They'd departed for a 10-day trip to the coast, eager for ocean breezes and relaxation, trusting her and her younger stepbrother Lucas to manage things. It seemed simple enough to responsible adults watching over an empty home. Yet the instant the front door latched and their car vanished around the corner, the quiet settled differently. The rooms felt alert somehow, as though anticipating what might unfold. Standing in the front hallway, Sophie crossed her arms and reminded herself that nothing had actually changed. She'd always been the dependable one, methodical, cautious, grounded. Lucas, meanwhile, approached life with an unhurried ease, handling challenges with steady composure. He'd returned from university for this stretch, mainly because their mother had insisted he reconnect with everyone. Sophie didn't mind his company, but she hadn't expected it to feel so unfamiliar. He'd matured in subtle ways she'd overlooked, taller than her memory suggested, more contemplative in conversation, carrying himself with quiet confidence. Their first night began with a practical tour through every room, checking door locks and switching off unnecessary lights, the kind of routine their mother worried about constantly. Lucas joked that they were now co-captains of their temporary vessel, trying to coax a smile from Sophie. She attempted one, though her thoughts kept wandering. Something about spending an entire week alone with him made her conscious of how separate their lives had become. As if they shared a space but had stopped truly knowing one another. As twilight descended, they found themselves on the front steps, each holding a mug of hot chocolate. Sophie had suggested it instinctively, wanting to fill the silence with something comforting and familiar. They settled onto the wooden planks, watching the horizon shift through shades of amber and rose. It should have felt unremarkable. Siblings sitting together was ordinary enough, but the stillness between them wasn't tense. It felt natural, almost soothing in a way Sophie hadn't anticipated. She could hear Lucas breathing evenly beside her, calm and unhurried. And for the first time since their parents left, the tightness in her shoulders released. Lucas took a measured sip before saying, "The house has a different energy without them here, doesn't it?" His tone was gentle, simply honest. Sophie glanced over and nodded. "It really does." She didn't mention that the emptiness felt emotional somehow, as though old memories were reverberating through the hallways. She recalled younger days racing through these same rooms, bickering over video game controllers, laughing over insignificant things. She remembered when their blended family had felt more cohesive, before everyone drifted into separate rhythms. She studied him from the corner of her eye. He appeared different in the fading light, more mature, with a contemplative expression she didn't recall from before. It made her wonder what else she'd missed about him. Perhaps the distance hadn't grown from indifference. Perhaps they'd both been moving forward without pausing long enough to truly see each other. They remained on the steps, longer than intended, discussing ordinary things, courses, work obligations, their parents' enthusiastic phone updates about the journey. Nothing profound, nothing overly emotional, just enough to break the quiet. Yet beneath every exchange, something unspoken existed, a subtle recognition that something between them was transforming. Not dramatically or inappropriately, but in a gentle, human way. A rediscovery, a growing warmth. When darkness finally settled completely, they stood to head inside. Lucas took her empty mug without asking, as though it was perfectly natural. She thanked him softly. The house welcomed them with dim shadows and cool air. Sophie paused at the staircase base, experiencing an unexpected flutter of emotion. She couldn't explain why she felt so aware of everything, his footsteps trailing behind, the echo of their earlier laughter, the quiet comfort the evening had brought. Before they separated toward their bedrooms, Lucas said, "It's actually pleasant being here with just the two of us." Sophie looked at him, uncertain how to respond. Part of her wanted to deflect with something casual, keeping things uncomplicated, but another part, the honest part, felt exactly the same. She offered a small, tentative smile. Yeah, it really is. They went to their respective rooms, but the silence no longer felt hollow. Sophie lay in bed replaying the day, examining small moments she hadn't expected would matter. The way Lucas had smiled at the sunset, the calm quality in his voice, the effortless ease between them that hadn't existed before. She didn't know what the coming days would bring, but she sensed something shifting within her, a quiet curiosity, a gentle warmth, something she couldn't yet name. The house felt different, and so did she. The week had barely started, and Sophie had no idea how much it would transform the temporary space they were sharing. Alone and unexpectedly connected, the storm arrived with no warning. The afternoon sky had been clear, but by early evening, dark clouds rolled across the valley like a heavy curtain. Sophie was preparing dinner when the first thunder rattled the windows. She paused mid-motion, knife suspended, feeling the vibration travel through the countertop. She typically wasn't afraid of storms, but this one felt more intense, louder, closer, almost personal. The lights wavered once, then twice, and before she could call for Lucas, everything went black. A brilliant lightning flash illuminated the entire kitchen momentarily, and Sophie's pulse quickened. She disliked feeling startled, but the sudden silence of the powerless house made her chest constrict. She stepped carefully into the hallway, using her phone's faint glow to navigate. "Lucas," she called, keeping her voice as steady as possible. A quiet laugh echoed from the living area. "You all right?" He responded, approaching with a small flashlight. He held it beneath his chin, making an exaggerated expression, and despite her nervousness, she laughed. The tension dissolved immediately. That had always been one of Lucas's strengths, diffusing heavy moments with simple humor. He handed her the flashlight and retrieved several candles from a drawer. Together, they arranged them throughout the living room until warm, golden light filled the space. The storm outside seemed distant compared to the soft, sheltered glow. Rain pounded against the windows, but inside, everything felt strangely secure. Lucas sat on the floor, leaning against the sofa, and gestured for Sophie to join him. She did, folding her legs close, watching the candlelight flicker around them. The storm had enclosed them in a bubble of stillness, and for the first time in ages, they had nothing to distract themselves with, no devices, no television, no ambient noise. Just silence and each other's presence. "I suppose we'll have to entertain ourselves," Lucas said with a slight smile. Sophie nodded. "I suppose so." Their conversation began lightly, university anecdotes, embarrassing memories, funny things their mother always repeated. But gradually, Sophie noticed Lucas's tone shifting. His voice grew softer, less playful. He stared at the candle flame briefly before speaking again. "To be honest," he said quietly, "I've felt pretty adrift this year." Sophie's eyebrows lifted. Lucas rarely opened up like this. He usually kept things internal, maintaining composure even when life felt challenging. She leaned slightly forward, listening. "I know I act like everything's under control," he continued, "but university has been difficult. Not academically everything surrounding it. I'm not certain what I'm doing. I'm not even confident the major I chose is correct for me." He laughed softly, but it wasn't humorous this time. It was weariness. Sophie felt warmth spread through her chest, part sympathy, part surprise. "You never mentioned that," she whispered. "You never asked," he said, though there was no accusation in his voice, just truth. She lowered her gaze. He was right. She'd been so consumed with her own routines, responsibilities, and private concerns that she hadn't noticed his struggles. Perhaps she'd assumed he was fine because he always appeared fine. Wanting to match his honesty, Sophie shared her own feelings. "I feel invisible sometimes," she admitted. Like I'm just moving between obligations, work, bills, helping mom with various things. I don't think I've had a genuine conversation like this in months. Lucas nodded slowly. Then I'm grateful the power went out. Maybe we needed this. A soft smile touched Sophie's lips. She wasn't accustomed to being truly seen, not with this kind of quiet attention that made her chest feel strangely warm. Outside, thunder rolled again, but she barely registered it. They'd entered a different kind of storm, an emotional one, gentle yet powerful. After a while, Lucas leaned back on his hands, studying her thoughtfully. You know, he said, I always assumed you had everything figured out. You've always been the strong one. Sophie released a small breath. I'm strong because I need to be. That doesn't mean I don't get exhausted. His expression softened with concern. You deserve to rest sometimes, too. Those simple words affected her unexpectedly, not because they were dramatic, but because they were caring, sincere. Something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The room fell quiet again, not awkwardly, but meaningfully. The candles flickered between them like small reminders of their sudden closeness. Eventually, the storm began subsiding. The thunder grew more distant, the rain gentled, and the darkness felt less intimidating. But something inside Sophie had already transformed. She felt lighter, calmer, connected in a way she hadn't anticipated. Lucas stood to check the windows. Storm's passing, he said, glancing back with a small smile. We survived. Sophie watched him for a moment, realizing how differently she perceived him now, not as the somewhat distant younger stepbrother she thought she knew, but as someone who understood her in a quiet, surprising way. When the lights finally restored, the sudden brightness made them both blink. But the warm connection between them didn't vanish. It remained in the atmosphere, soft and unspoken. They cleaned up the candles, laughing lightly, but the honest conversation lingered like a memory neither wanted to lose. The storm had altered something, and neither knew how to return to what existed before. The morning following the storm felt remarkably peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the windows, gentle and warm, as though trying to comfort the house after a turbulent night. Sophie woke feeling lighter than expected. The deep conversation she'd shared with Lucas still replayed in her thoughts, not dramatically, but in a quiet way that made her chest feel warm. She wasn't accustomed to sharing feelings like that with him. She wasn't accustomed to being seen that way at all. Hoping to keep things simple, she suggested they tackle the backyard garden, something their mother had been mentioning for months. Lucas agreed readily, and after breakfast, they stepped outside into the bright morning air. The backyard looked honestly messy and full sunlight, overgrown shrubs, persistent weeds, scattered leaves, but Sophie welcomed having something physical to focus on. After the emotional intensity the night before, she needed a task for her hands. Lucas retrieved tools from the shed, while Sophie pulled on gloves and tied back her hair. When he returned, he handed her a small rake and said, "We'll make Mom proud today." She smiled, appreciating how he kept the moment light. They worked for a while without much conversation, clearing weeds and trimming overgrowth. The sun warmed their backs, and the fresh scent of soil filled the air. Gradually, the backyard began looking more alive. Sophie noticed Lucas humming quietly as he worked something he'd done as a child. It made her glance at him repeatedly, surprised by how familiar it felt, yet how different it appeared now that he was older. After about an hour, they both stepped back to catch their breath. Sophie lifted her hand to wipe perspiration from her forehead, accidentally smearing dirt across her cheek. Lucas noticed immediately. "Hold still," he said softly, stepping closer. Before she could react, he reached out and gently brushed the dirt away with his thumb. The moment was small, simple, innocent, but it affected her unexpectedly. His touch was careful, almost protective, and it made her heart skip in a way she didn't understand. She froze, feeling the warmth of his hand even after he pulled back. Lucas seemed to realize what he'd done and stepped away quickly, clearing his throat. "Sorry, you had something there." Sophie nodded, though her voice didn't emerge right away. "It's fine," she managed, trying to sound normal, though the air around them felt different now, softer, heavier. Charged with something unspoken. To escape the growing awkwardness, she returned to pulling weeds. Lucas joined her, but they were both quieter than before. The earlier rhythm had shifted. Every time their hands brushed near the same tool, or when they reached for branches simultaneously, Sophie felt a small spark of awareness. She didn't know how to process it. After completing most of the yard work, they sat beneath the large oak tree for a break. It had been their favorite spot years ago, a place where they'd hidden during family games or eaten popsicles on hot days. Sitting there now, Sophie felt old memories and new emotions swirling inside her. She sipped her lemonade and exhaled slowly, trying to steady her thoughts. Lucas rested his back against the trunk, gazing up at branches swaying gently in the breeze. "It feels satisfying to restore this space," he said. "Like we're repairing something." Sophie nodded. "Yeah, it does." But she wasn't just thinking about the garden. She was thinking about them, how distant they'd grown over the years, and how somehow, in just a few days, that distance seemed to shrink in small but significant ways. A long silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was contemplative, almost emotional, the kind of silence that made her more aware of her heartbeat than the breeze. Lucas eventually broke it. "Sophie, do you ever feel like life transforms when you're not paying attention?" She turned to look at him. His expression wasn't confused. It was reflective, as though he was trying to understand something within himself. "Yeah," she said slowly. "I'm feeling it right now." The moment the words left her mouth, she wished she could retract them or explain them better. But the truth was too simple to hide. Something between them was changing, not inappropriately, but in a gentle, human way. An emotional closeness that surprised them both. Lucas looked away first, studying the ground as if he needed time to think. Sophie felt her heart thud against her ribs. She didn't know what he was thinking, and she wasn't brave enough to ask to ease the tension. She brought up old memories, funny stories from childhood, silly mistakes they'd made, moments that felt safe and light. Lucas laughed, grateful for the mood shift. But beneath the laughter, something unspoken still lingered, quiet and warm. The sun began descending, casting longer shadows across the yard. They stood to gather their tools, their movements slower and more aware than before. When they returned everything to the shed, their hands brushed again, and both pulled away quickly, pretending not to notice as they headed inside. Sophie felt a strange mixture of confusion and comfort. She didn't understand the change she felt, and she didn't know what it meant, but she couldn't deny it anymore. Something had shifted between them, something soft, quiet, and complicated. And she wasn't certain whether the feeling frightened her or made her feel genuinely alive for the first time in a long while. The final days of the week passed more quickly than Sophie expected. The house no longer felt unfamiliar, and the silence didn't feel oppressive anymore. Instead, there was a gentle kind of calm between her and Lucas, warm, unspoken, and unexpectedly comfortable. They moved through the house with an easy rhythm, assisting each other naturally, completing tasks as if they'd been doing it together for years. Every moment felt organic, but also delicate, like something new was forming quietly between them. On the last evening before their parents were scheduled to return, Sophie was chopping vegetables in the kitchen while Lucas searched the refrigerator for something to drink. Music played softly from the speaker, the kind of simple acoustic songs that filled space without overwhelming it. Light from the setting sun streamed through the window, casting everything in warm gold. Sophie felt peaceful finally after days of unexpected closeness. Shifting emotions and silent questions. This moment felt steady and safe. That peace shifted quickly when her phone began ringing. Her mother's name appearing on the screen. Sophie froze. She hadn't expected the call to affect her so strongly, but something inside her tightened. The phone rang again. Lucas looked at her. "You should answer," he said with a small smile. She put it on speaker and moved closer to the counter. "Hi, Mom," she said, attempting to keep her voice bright. Her mother's cheerful voice filled the kitchen instantly. "Hey, sweetheart. How are you two managing? We miss you already." Sophie glanced at Lucas, who grinned and raised his eyebrows as if encouraging her to tell the truth. She smiled softly before answering. "We're good. Everything's under control. The house is fine." Lucas leaned against the counter, listening quietly. Their mother told them about her trip, the beaches, the restaurants, the sunshine. She laughed about how their father had gotten sunburned the first day and now had to wear a hat everywhere. Sophie and Lucas laughed too, but something unspoken lingered in the air. The call reminded them that their time alone was ending. The quiet world they'd been inhabiting all week was about to be interrupted. Before hanging up, their mother added, "I'm so glad you two are spending time together. It makes me truly happy. You used to be so close." Her voice softened, warm and hopeful. Maybe this week brought that back. Sophie's chest tightened. She didn't know what to say. Lucas stepped forward and answered for her, his tone gentle. "Yeah, Mom, it's been nice. Really nice." When the call ended, the kitchen fell silent, not empty, just thoughtful. Sophie placed her phone on the counter and exhaled slowly. The sudden shift from cheerful conversation to quiet reality made her heart beat a little faster. Lucas watched her for a moment. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, though her voice wavered slightly. "Yeah, it's just ... Everything feels different." Lucas stepped closer, not dramatically, not with specific intention, just naturally, as if drawn there without thinking. "You mean this week?" he asked softly. Sophie nodded again, unsure how to articulate her feelings without making them sound heavier than they were. She wasn't seeking anything complicated. She didn't want to confuse the moment. She only knew that something meaningful had occurred, something gentle, honest, and real. "I didn't expect it," she finally said. "I didn't expect us to reconnect like this."